Yo, it's me, Uncle Ricky. Look, let's talk about President Biden and his current trip to the NATO summit. I think they're all in Lithuania right now. And of course, the topic outside of, how to keep the NATO alliance going is the Ukraine war and the admission of Ukraine actually into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Ukraine has requested admission, and most of the members agree that Ukraine should become a member of NATO to strengthen their alliance against, guess who? Russia and its current dictator Putin. But, whoever becomes dictator in Russia eventually will try to take over the rest of Europe anyway. But the current thing going on with NATO is that the NATO allies are kind of split between on when to bring when to bring Ukraine in. They've already brought in, I think it was Sweden and Finland. I think Sweden is now a NATO country, or soon will be a NATO country after this conference. But don't quote me on that. But I know between Sweden and Finland, one of them is going in. It sounds like a Hall of Fame selection for the NFL or MLB or something. But no, back to Ukraine. They can't come in. They can't. Everybody knows, even Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, who, by the way, is caught in a situation I don't think some of the world's greatest leaders would like to be in. A few have been, but he needs to get into NATO to help get rid of the burden of Russia trying to take his country. But NATO can't accept him because the NATO alliance, one of the things of their charter that holds them together is that if you attack one NATO country, then all the NATO countries come in and attempt to kick your ass. So that would be basically World War III, which we're not too far from now. But then there's other things, like there's things that countries have to do to qualify to become a NATO country. And before the thing with Russia, Ukraine was, had really been going after, but it's more about, Ukrainian, I don't want to say culture, but how Ukraine has conducted their government business over, say, the past few decades, especially post World War II. All the rampant corruption and stuff. Zelensky got in because he ran as an anti-corruption candidate for president, and he won. His former job was comedian, and I'm pretty sure this poor man doesn't think that anything's freaking funny in Ukraine right now. But he has to, because Ukraine, didn't have the military-industrial complex that supposedly the Soviet Union has, and Ukraine doesn't have anywhere near the money or the money-making potential, for that matter, that the Soviet Union does. Ukraine needs NATO. They need these weapons that they constantly begging for, because the only way they can keep Russia out of Ukraine, push them back into Russia, is to go toe-to-toe, shell for shell. And there's a mismatch in the numbers, people and weapons and ammunition. And it's actually amazing if you look at the numbers and the statistics. Russia sucks, because there's no reason that Ukraine, even with the help they're getting from the NATO nations and other Western allies, there's no reason Russia shouldn't have won. Putin said, that it was going to be maybe three days to a month and the war would be over. This is going on 2 years now. In February, it'll be 2 years. And it doesn't look like Russia's going to win. Ukraine's taking a hell of a beating. But back to the NATO thing. So, okay, Zelensky says, okay, I understand about we don't want to start World War III, or you guys don't want to start World War III. World War III is already in my backyard, so screw y'all. But I need your help. now you're giving me help, but so why can't you give me a timeline? Because we don't want this war to go on forever. Tell me in writing what else Ukraine has to do to become a member of NATO, because as long as there's a Russia and as long as there's people in charge of Russia like Putin, which there's like hundreds, maybe thousands, of oligarchs and, despots and whatever, criminals, ready to take over Russia. Because when Putin falls, Russia will be up for grabs. Well, it seems that Grandpa Joe, the guy that's given Ukraine tons of money, tons of weapons and stuff, telling the Republican Party to kiss his butt. And actually, I agree with Biden, because as long as we're giving Ukraine weapons, we don't have to be going over there fighting. Because once we stop giving them weapons, Ukraine's going to fall, and then Russia's going to use Ukraine as a staging ground to attack Poland, Finland, some other NATO country, or NATO allied, or NATO friendly country, and World War III would just commence. Ukraine was a stepping stone, just like Poland was a stepping stone during World War II. It was a tune-up for the method, except the Germans were better at it than it seems that Putin and his wonderful army is. Now, back to Zelensky. Zelensky has to be careful, because he has to beg, he has to yell, he has to scream, he has to kick like a 5-year-old having a temper tantrum to keep these weapons coming. He has to put demands on the people that are helping him, because without Ukraine getting into NATO, as soon as this conflict is over, if it doesn't come to a resolution that is agreeable to all parties concerned, Russia's just going to wait, whether it's Putin or not. He's just going to wait 5 or 10 years and wait for the next opportunity, and Ukraine's going to be fighting all over again to kick Russia out of its backyard. That's how Russia has been operating ever since World War II. Now, the thing with Biden saying, look, you're going to become a member of NATO, but you're not ready yet. I get it, but I don't get it, because none of the current members of NATO had to, do this timetable, get yourself right before you come to Jesus thing. And it was basically like at the end of World War II, a bunch of scared European countries that were trying to rebuild. They knew they had knocked off the Nazis in Germany, but now you got Russia, and Russia's kicking ass in Eastern Europe, Poland, Germany was split up, East and West Germany, Czechoslovakia. The Russian communist influence was heavy throughout Europe. So these countries came together, and the United States played, father, the protector, the great protector, the great white father, and said, okay, we're going to form a treaty alliance, and we're going to call it NATO, and our whole purpose is to keep Russia in its place, not let it take any more of Europe. You can't say it didn't work, because the constant pressure of NATO and, influenced by, some people like Ronald Reagan with the Star Wars scam, and the inefficiency and the fallacy of the communist government style. And it doesn't matter what people you are, or who you are, or where you're from, continual oppression with no sight of relief. It may be short-term or it may be long-term, but eventually the people are going to revolt, because you can never take that desire for freedom out of everybody at the same time. Now, Zelensky is walking a tightrope. He's trying to keep his country, his people engaged in the war, keep their morale up, and he's having to beg for money and weapons at the same time from the same people he has to make demands to get into the club to protect his country in the long run. Not a good situation for an individual, not a good situation for a country. But back to Papa Joe. Papa Joe says, yeah, you getting in, but you know you can't come in now because then that would start a world war. And there's some things you gotta do. Zelensky's asking the question, what things do I have to do? Put them in writing. Tell me so I can tell Ukraine, and while we're fighting this dumbass war that we didn't start, we can meet your requirements and obligations, and we can be a member of the club so we don't have to worry about Russia anymore. It's just that simple. And they keep being vague. The question is why. The reason is, it's one thing to give weapons, it's another thing to send troops. As long as they're not in NATO, that's one thing that keeps most of the NATO allies from having to fight Russia. As long as Ukraine is being a pain in the ass to the Russian military, proving that the Russian military basically sucks, worse than a popsicle on a hot day in Nevada, Las Vegas, NATO doesn't have to worry. Okay, maybe that's a little dirty and underneath and underhanded, but it's the truth. As long as Ukrainians are dying, Americans aren't dying, Germans aren't dying, British aren't dying, French aren't dying, Ukraine is taking the brunt. Well, then you got to look at it like this. Russia attacked Ukraine. Now, the other thing is, as long as Ukraine is not part of NATO, the NATO allies have ammunition to use to get both sides to come to the peace table. Ukraine doesn't want to go to the peace table until they push Russia either back across the border or as close as possible and regain some territory they lost. Not only territory in this invasion, but Crimea, which they lost a couple of years ago. And this is part of Zelensky's dilemma. In order to make the counteroffensive work, they need the continual input of the weapons. They need more ammunition, and they need better weapons. It seems that they're going to get F-16s and they're going to get trained. Maybe the NATO partners said, well, look, we got to do something for them because they got a valid point, but we can't start World War III. So let's give them the F-16s and train them. And so maybe they'll be quiet. And we'll tell them that, and underneath we're really serious about them getting into NATO, but it's going to be on our time and our schedule. But we're not going to tell them what that schedule is. And this is the madness that our world is wrapped up in right now. I give Zelensky all the credit in the world because he's held his country together and done some things that no other what other president in this modern day and age is brave enough to go to the front lines of an actual war, jet to other countries that are adjacent to the country that he's at war with to plead his country's case. Big ups. But this thing with NATO, the thing with Biden, it's confusing, but it all makes sense if you peel back the layers of the onion. And you got to do that to understand what's going on. That doesn't make the situation any better. How's it going to end up? Of course, it's going to end up with Ukraine having to bite the bullet, Ukrainians having to die. But in the end, they'll get their wish. They'll become members of NATO, but the war will be over. And Ukraine will probably be the victor, but they're going to have to give up more than they want to give up to in this war. Well, that's it for me. Y'all can think about it, meditate on it. But peace out. God bless. And see you when I see you from Uncle Ricky at Uncle Ricky's house.